He approached me and he just said, have you ever been to Egypt? And I said, no, I haven't been to Egypt. And so he was like, yeah, you definitely need to go visit a Hathor temple because your likeness is on those walls.
I am here with Dr. Caroline Williams, who is a functional medicine practitioner, attunement practitioner, and biogeometry practitioner. She is a woman of many talents and many gifts. Caroline is also building her awareness expansion community. She is in the process of building a physical community in Oklahoma, incorporating sustainable principles, biogeometry principles, and living in harmony with the earth and healing the environment, healing ourselves in the process.
Thank you so much, Naomi. That's such a beautiful entry. I love that. We met because we are both biogeometry practitioners. We're all both on our journey of learning biogeometry. So I love that.
Well, I've done 1 and 2, so I'm not a practitioner.
Right. But you're on your way.
Yeah.
You understand why it's valuable, and we have tools that we can use. And then human design.
Yes.
Design is something that you've dedicated a tremendous amount of time and energy and mastering. And you did a reading for me and it was beautiful.
Really a pleasure. It was the multidimensional aspect that really magnetized us to each other, because that's how I read human design charts. I look at you multidimensionally because we do exist on different levels. And for me, it was so clear that Caroline is here to invite us into having these direct experiences with the divine through her sharing of her own direct experience with the divine, this death and rebirth. I'd love to hear more about the series of synchronicities and events that led you to this latest project of yours.
You know, my hope is, as I share this, that everybody can relate it to their own experience, right? And maybe pay attention to that, of like how their own life is unfolding over time in relation to their own journey. As Joseph Campbell would say, we're all on this hero's journey, right? And so that's absolutely true. And so a lot of times, though, when I do speak with people, they don't necessarily see it that way. And so I want to invite everyone to really look at how their life has unfolded as that, you know? So this latest project came in back in 2021. At that time, I had started formally training as an attunement practitioner. And so we were doing attunement regularly as a result of that. At that time, that was during COVID. It was the very first time that they offered it virtually. You know, normally you'd have to go to the ranch. They teach this at Sunrise Ranch, which is a nonprofit spiritual community in the Loveland, Colorado area. It's a beautiful area. During this process, what was coming in for me was to start developing a place where we could live in harmony with nature again. That was really the big picture. At first, I thought it was just going to be, you know, me and my immediate family that would do this initially. It wasn't initially coming in that I would be doing it for a community. That unfolded gradually, like, oh, this isn't just going to be for my immediate family. This is going to be for a community. Doing attunement really expanded me and opened me up to be ready for this information to come in, because so much shifted and changed in my interaction with the world and how I was seeing the world. But yeah, like my vision of the world, my experience in the world how I was showing up in the world very much was different as I was experiencing attunement more and more. So this vision came in, this information came in as to what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And what was interesting is during this time as well, I have been a member of Edgar Cayce's ARE, which stands for Association for Research and Enlightenment. And they have been around for, I think 80, 90 years, long time. And so Edgar Cayce, why I'm bringing that up is because during this process of unfolding of how we're going to build this community, he did readings on ancient Egypt. And anybody who doesn't know who Edgar Cayce is, he's considered like the Nostradamus of the 20th century.
He's the sleeping prophet,
The
right?
sleeping prophet. Yeah, absolutely. And he just had this natural innate ability from a very young age to go into a trance, and he would be able to convey information from that state of being. Later, he described it as he was accessing what was called the Akashic records, right? Which is a record hall that's available for us to access. That is the collective history forever, right? Of what we would perceive as linear time. He would do these different readings. And so he did a number of readings on different subjects, but a lot of his readings were about Atlantis and ancient Egypt. He talked about two temples that existed in ancient Egypt. One was the Temple Beautiful, and the other was the Temple of Sacrifice. And he remembered himself in another timeline as being a high priest during that time. His name was Rata, and he helped create these temples. He was also the first individual to say that there was one God. There was a single God, and he taught what was called the law of one. But they were doing different things in these two different temples. One of the temples basically was a temple for sound. A lot of what they did in there was to regenerate the human body, was to reverse the aging process and regenerate and heal the human body. And also was a temple of, the most beautiful things that existed on the planet. They would do like different chanting that would activate the body in a specific way to help with the healing process. The other temple, a lot of people would think Temple of Sacrifice sounds horrible, but it's actually a place for learning. And also, in terms of any kind of sacrifice, it would be a personal aspect of our own development, right? Because there are aspects that we have to let go of to be able to develop in the way that we're here to develop. There was a lot of education in that temple related to many times what your gifts innately were. So that was coming in at that time, like, oh, okay, we're going to recreate a version of this in the community. And it won't necessarily look exactly like those temples at that time. It's going to be more like a modern version based on Dr. Ibrahim Karim's work with biogeometry. He's an Egyptian architect.
Here's where the story gets interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
it was at a biogeometry event where a gentleman approached you and clued you into Hathor, right?
Yeah. Even Dr. Ibrahim Karim, how he came in is because during this time when I was learning attunement and all this information was coming in as to like, oh, you're going to build a community and there's going to be a relationship with these temples that existed during the last golden age, because that was during the golden age, which we can talk about back here in the background. It's definitely been an unfolding, right? It didn't come in all at once. So in regards to that, these temples, the golden age, I was then attracted to Dr. Robert Gilbert's work. And I found him, interestingly enough, around that same time during this timeline. And learning about him and Vesica Institute, saw that they were offering the biogeometry courses. And then I just knew that that was part of how we were going to build. Where we were going to build and how we were going to build was based on this ancient Egyptian awareness and understanding of power spots in the earth and how the ancients used to build on these power spots. And they would build in a way that would magnify these power spots, which are bringing more life force energy into that area. And the benefit of that is it promotes healing, it promotes growth, everything that more life force would do. And so that made complete total sense. So that was part of this journey as well, learning about biogeometry. And over the last few years, I made some pretty significant moves to start this process of developing and building this community. But I will say that everything happens in divine timing is what I have learned through this journey. It's not just up to me. What I need to do is just listen to and pay attention to the prompts and follow them. Like I'm being guided. So it's relatively easy as long as I'm paying attention and present to the indicators. So that's how it's unfolded. And you mentioned Hathor. So this was really interesting. I went to go see Dr. Kareem speak at the Gaia-Sphere in Colorado. It's the first time I've been to Gaia-Sphere. Somebody had approached me on one of the breaks that we had, and I'd seen him walking around, but he approached me and he just said, "Have you ever been to Egypt?" Like he didn't say anything else, right? He just said, "Have you ever been to Egypt?" And I said, "No, I haven't been to Egypt. I plan on going, but I haven't been there yet." And he's Egyptian. And so he was like, "Yeah, you definitely need to go visit a Hathor temple because your likeness is on those walls." I was like, "Oh, yeah, interesting." That stimulated something in me and activated and initiated something in me to now look at Hathor. What was Hathor about? Who is Hathor? And understanding what she's about. Really, very much many of those qualities I embody, those qualities. She's certainly about love, about balance, about harmony, about birthing, right? About bringing in new life. So I started going down that road of understanding her better.
And Hathor is one aspect of the feminine, right?
Yes.
I thought it was interesting that there are two aspects of the feminine.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So I went on this journey of some things happening where Hathor was kind of the initiator, and that really resonated for sure. And that there's some degree of embodiment where Hathor is concerned within myself. I always knew that attunement felt familiar to me. So when I was learning attunement, I think what was coming in for me during that time was I've done this before, and this goes back to Egypt. This goes back to ancient Egypt and what we did there as part of it as initiates in ancient Egypt. And so, and I have another experience to share about that if anybody wants to hear that. But that happened to me while I was learning attunement. That's like nothing that's happened since, but it was pretty impactful. But more recently, so like as we're going through these meetings and going through the attunement material again, what was presented was something called Sekhem. So Sekhem was what they called it in ancient Egypt, where you're doing this healing practice, which is attunement, that we call it attunement now. It was called Sekhem back then. And I was like, oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I've done this before. Sekhem relates to Sekhmet, which is another goddess during the age of Leo. Both Hathor and Sekhmet were goddesses at that time during the last golden age, the age of Leo, right? And so Sekhmet is the other face of the divine feminine, and she represents power and protection and healing. That's why Sekhem is connected to Sekhmet because healing is that. And so I very much resonated with both of those sides and both of those faces of the divine feminine. See, I went to see Dr. Cream in June of this year. The man approached me about Hathor, and then Sekhmet came in, about a month and a half later. But in between that time, I went through this very physically challenging experience where it was like I had been hit by lightning. Like, that's the best way to describe it. My system just caught on fire. It's like my nervous system was on fire. And I exhibited physical effects of that, like almost like burn marks on my skin. My mucous membranes were super inflamed for a little while and super sensitive. My arms would literally feel like they were on fire. It was very challenging. And then literally within a few weeks of that starting, I purged for 3 days straight. I went through a major purge for 3 days. I was trying to understand what was happening to me. And interestingly enough, during the Lionsgate portal, I had engaged in a ceremony with a shaman, and she had us do a drawing. And this drawing that we all did, she would then interpret it for us. I didn't share my drawing to the very end, so she didn't interpret mine with everyone, but I ended up booking a call with her the next week. And when we were on the call, she interpreted my drawing. Basically, what happened was I explained to her my experience recently about feeling like I had been hit by lightning and what had transpired. She is a Aboriginal shaman. So for her, it's in her ancestry. And she shared with me there's 2 ways that shamans are determined. One is the ancestral, like it's a lineage, ancestral lineage. So it's inherited. The other way is to be hit by lightning. So that was really interesting because I had agreed to enter into a mentor type training with Heather Ensworth months before. And so this new training that I'm doing with her is a astrological and shamanic training over the last year. And so I did a deep dive with that as well to just understand that, because that also felt resonant. Like, this is the time that you're supposed to do this. So why I bring that up is because her sharing that with me, I felt like was also significant and meaningful based on the experience that I'd had, as well as when she looked at my drawing, she said, "Your drawing represents collapse. Like, everything is just collapsing in on itself." And so, I have been in a transit of death and rebirth at this time. And this transit really started January 2023, this death rebirth transit, and I'm still going through it. And so I thought I was going to come out of this transit pretty unscathed. But yeah, no. I had to go through this whole physical process of death and rebirth. And, a lot of things were surfacing at that time because that's what Pluto does. It's an excavator, and it unearths everything that needs to be transmuted and processed so that you can become a new person, right? You can become who you're meant to be, right? So that definitely happened. I had what I would call a persecution imprint that I had came in with that has always been with me. That was certainly strengthened by some stuff that I happened in childhood, but it was time to let it go. I had to let that go. And so that was surfacing at that time. So in talking to her, it was very helpful on my journey of like understanding these things that I was experiencing and what these things were. So now going back to Sekhmet and Sekhmet and being the other face of the divine feminine, she also represents purification. And so her presence in my consciousness and my awareness at this time has everything to do with hey, before you get to really fully embody and bring into the world Hathor, we have to purify everything, right? In my opinion, that's going to happen for the collective as well. We're going to go through this kind of purification process. Much of the time, it can be an internal experience. If you're working with these energies that are showing up in your life to help you evolve in the way that you're meant to for your becoming, then it will be more of an internal experience that you'll have. But if you're not responding to these prompts, if you're not acting and working with these energies, and you're resisting the prompts, in other words, you're ignoring or resisting these prompts internally, then you'll have more of this show up externally in your life. I want to emphasize, as I'm telling this story, things are happening in your life to help you evolve the way that you were meant to, right? And so that's what I want people to take from this too, is like they're having their own experience. And how are they perceiving that? How are they interpreting that? What is their perception around that? It means everything in regards to their own journey, right?
Where are we in the cycle right now?
We just came out of a major precessional cycle of 24,000 years. Think about that. 24,000 years just ended of this huge precessional cycle. What is a precessional cycle? It is, you're going through this wheel that you see back here. You're going through these constellations, these zodiac constellations. We're in these constellations for 2,000 years each. There's 12. So 2,000 years each, that equates to 24,000 years. We call them ages. So right now, we just ended one and we're starting a new one. We just started the beginning of the first part of the precessional cycle. So we'll just say that's 12,000 years. We just entered into Aquarius. Okay, so we're early in that early stage of the age of Aquarius. And what's really important to understand about these precessional cycles is that for the first 12,000 years, we're on an ascending cycle. When we're ascending, we're moving towards typically the next, what we call the golden age, right? When you're on an ascension energy, I correlate that to activating more of our right brain. That's being activated more when we're on ascension. And that correlates to what we call the divine feminine. When we're on a descension, it's the opposite. When we're on a descension, that's activating more the left and more of the masculine, right? And so we just came out of a major descension. So you would see more, it's more of a strengthening of that masculine and the further that you are in the descension. The lower you are in the descension, that's really strengthened. And so what does that represent, right? The left brain is very linear, logical, more reduction of space, be more material. The left generally brings more material into the world, right? It's bringing in that material. So there's going to makes sense that there was so much of a focus on the material aspect of things and on the physical aspect of things. And we were in a time where masculine was dominant. The patriarchy was stronger as a result of that. Now, though, that we're coming out of that ended in March. Now we're on an ascension, and now the right brain is being activated again. And the right brain represents more our connection with spirit, our connection with the divine intelligence that's behind everything, all of creation. It's what unifies us. So what's interesting too about this descension time period and ascension is during descension, it's also a time of forgetting. When you're descending, you are forgetting, you're kind of moving further away from what I just described, which is that divine aspect, you forget your connection to that. You even forget who you have been across time, right? Because we are forever beings. We've always existed, and we're individuations from the whole. We go back to the whole, we come back out, right? And so what's amazing about this is, to me, it explains where we have been as a collective. We've been in this period of dissension, a time of forgetting, a time of imbalance. And so now we're moving into the ascension. And so what do you see happening in the collective? You see the divine feminine rising pretty rapidly right now. There's this rapid ascension of that within each of us and in the collective. So you're going to see this remembering again. You're going to see a greater connection with spirit. And how this relates to the time that we're in, interestingly enough, is we're in this time of Aquarius here. And from a biogeometry perspective and an astrological perspective, what's right across from that is Leo. The age of Leo is right across from where we're at in the beginning of Aquarius. And Leo was the last golden age. That was the time where we had the greatest balance within ourselves and within the collective. It was a time of balance. That's why we call it the golden age, because we were connected. We remembered who we were. Our priority was our spiritual selves. Our egos were mastered in service to the spiritual aspect. Everything that we did was with a spiritual ideal in mind, first and foremost. That is even how we would build our structures, which we are doing again. This relates to how we're building again. And why is this significant? Because it is right across from us. It's coming in now. It's coming in through the background. It's coming in. And so in hearing Dr. Kareem speak about this, Dr. Kareem's an Egyptian architect. He said that the reason that there's such a fascination now with Egypt is because it is right across from us and it's coming in. 100%. It makes complete sense when you understand this precessional cycle that we've been in. I was sharing some of these things with Naomi, and she happened to, of my own personal experience, and she happened to look at my natal blueprint. And what's being activated specifically right now is Pluto during this Pluto transit. It's right at the bottom of my chart. And it's activating all my angles now in my chart. But it's right on my IC, and my north node is right there next to my IC. So it's activating all of that. And she happened to look, and what did you see?
I saw that Hathor, the asteroid Hathor, was conjunct your north node.
Yeah. So north node is our destiny. We're moving from the south node, which is familiar, which we've done before. We're moving from that south node to that north node. That's kind of the direction of this lifetime, right? And so I very much relate that north node with building this community.
And you're also, in terms of ICDC, you're a Leo Aquarius there, which is interesting.
Yes, exactly. And so what I ended up doing is understanding these times, right? Right now, we're at the beginning of this Aquarius cycle. We're over here in Leo. That's right across from us. That's coming through. I put the precessional cycle on my natal blueprint to see how that would correlate for this time, where my MC and my south node is. And it would have put me in a timeline of the age of Leo, but it was like right before and right after what would be considered the Great Flood, which was the time that Atlantis was destroyed, right? So for me, the meaning that brought to me was this was one of the timelines that I existed, and I'm bringing that in through this timeline. right? To do what we need to do here now. And all of us have this connection, right? Like we're still connected to those other timelines that we've experienced. And when I say timelines, I'm talking like what some people would perceive as past lives or maybe even future. A lot of these things are happening at the same time, right? Um, we will perceive it from a linear time perspective. And then you happen to see, was it Sulafat?
It's actually M57 that's conjunct your sun. And of course, there's Sulafat.
So the shaman that I mentioned, she seemed to think that I had a connection to Lyra. I thought I had a connection to Arcturus already. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it would make sense because of the relationship with Sul and the connection to the goddess Sekhmet.
It's all about harmonic healing, Lyra. That's yet another confirmation.
You know what's interesting too is there's a Hathor temple. It's in Dendera. It's a very prominent, famous temple there, and what's on the walls is highly preserved. And so I was very drawn to the Dendera temple recently while this was all unfolding. That the precessional cycle is at the top of the Dendera temple. And there were 7 Hathors that at one time were priestesses in that temple. So the number 7 was significant. There were 7 priestesses that supported and embodied what that represented. They would use certain instruments to create a certain vibrational sound, and they would do it in a way to create this geometric shape in there because 7 is the carrier number or carrier wave. And so they would do it to create this specific shape in there and resonance in there. So I was like, oh, yeah, I see us doing this again.
You have so many ideas about the kinds of things that you can offer through this community. I really want to ask you more about bringing energy work to institutions such as prisons.
So recently, I was thinking about if we use some of this awareness in areas that people really could use it and see how that shapes their own experience. We understand that biogeometry, the tools that Dr. Karim has created, if they're applied correctly, they can balance the energy of any environment. Okay. It'll have an effect on people's experience and balance within themselves. It can balance the environment. So the biogeometry will be a place to start, like balancing these areas like prisons, and then introducing attunement there as well. And attunement is a giving and receiving practice. So you can give someone an attunement and they can just experience it. It's just really a matter of them being receptive to that. But this could help bring more, again, of that life force energy through them for their own healing process. The commonality between biogeometry and attunement is it's all about bringing greater life force energy into an environment. So that could be a physical environment or a person, and help them, whatever needs to happen for them to have a greater connection with their divine self, the truth of who they are. And that can benefit them in a multitude of ways. But it would be interesting to see if these things were incorporated, how it would shape environments and individuals.
Because there's this interplay between the health of your environment and your own personal health, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If someone's environment is not supportive, they may not go as far in their healing than if their environment actually was supporting.
Another thing that I would say would be hugely powerful is to incorporate that these individuals in these environments, that they're eating in a way to maintain and balance blood sugar, because that is hugely impactful in how somebody feels and how they show up in the world. There's statistics that show that prisoners that are up for like a parole hearing, for example, if they have their hearing before lunch, it usually doesn't go well. It doesn't go well. If they have it after lunch, the chance that they'll get parole is much higher. And it has everything to do with how they're showing up in that hearing and that their blood sugar is balanced. Because a lot of us have heard about symptoms associated with imbalanced blood sugar. Being hangry is one of them, right? Being hangry. But we know that erratic behavior, mood challenges, depression, anxiety can all stem from imbalanced blood sugar can really drive that. And so it really does make a difference. So yeah, can you imagine just we have all the science, understand it, and we start incorporating these things, like what kind of a difference that can make in this environment? Like you could really start introducing these people to things that really would offer some true rehabilitation as opposed to just sequestering these people from the general population and expect that they're just going to get better on their own. Like truly rehabilitating, not doing things in ways that we know do not work. Yeah, let's just try some new things. Let's try some different things. Let's try to help these people have a greater connection with who they really are, right? And empower them to be able to choose between, are they listening to this ego aspect or are they listening to this divine aspect? It really just comes down to those two things. That's driving behavior,
I want to talk a little bit more about blood sugar dementia being type 3 diabetes, and that is related to the way your cells take sugar in, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a form of insulin resistance, right? And that's the ultimate cellular resistance is insulin resistance because insulin is a growth hormone. And so if your cells are resisting the message of insulin, they will not grow. And so what we know about insulin resistance is that it accelerates aging and premature death. So we know that. Yeah, it's very prominent in the scientific community. And so anytime you have excess glucose in the bloodstream, because that will happen when there's insulin resistance and the glucose is not able to get into the cells. And there's a reason for that. The body's trying to protect itself. But because there's this excess glucose in the bloodstream, it does damage all around. It does damage in the vascular system. It does damage to the eyes. It does damage to the brain. It does damage to the kidneys. You don't develop insulin resistance overnight. You develop over time. And so this has been going on, for a while. So that cumulative damage we know leads to a lot of preventable diseases. Cardiovascular disease is one. Dementia is another. It can contribute to development of cancer at some point. So a lot of the chronic diseases that we see, insulin resistance is a huge driver of that. So we will relate dementia in many cases to, many times they'll call it type 3 diabetes. Not to say that there aren't cases out there that are not related to that, but I would say that's a huge factor because of how many people are diabetic and pre-diabetic. And if you have somebody that's developing dementia and they are pre-diabetic or diabetic, that's definitely driving it. It's definitely a huge influence. But it's completely preventable and reversible. And so at least the insulin resistance is, you want to really deal with it before it evolves into these physical changes. Because once it's evolved into some of these physical changes, that's what's harder to change. Right? Now you've manifested it into the physical and crystallized it into the physical, and it's a little harder to change. Not to say that it can't, but it's just more work and you have to use more resources. And this just comes back to even sometimes Dr. Cream talks about we're living in a way to kind of appease our senses. But you have to have some balance. Again, insulin resistance is a reflection of being consistently out of balance. Health is all about balance. I've been in the healthcare field for 25 years. Their perception could be that they're eating healthy. and they're not. And they think that they're doing the right thing. No. And it isn't a matter of an opinion. It's reflected in their labs. It's reflected in objective data. I have a friend, she's not a patient, and I don't give medical advice unless I'm asked. Because again, when you're talking about people having to give up things that they love, it's very easy to get for somebody to be like, no, that's not true, you know. So they also need to be in a position to want the guidance. So I'm not one to give advice unless I've been asked, right? But that being said, I have a friend who she thought she was really eating healthy because she's a vegan. And so she's been a vegan for years. She went to go see somebody locally about just to see where she's at with her health. And of course, what came back, which I've also seen when I've evaluated people that were eating the way she was eating, she's pre-diabetic and she's going down this road of developing diabetes. And why is that? In my assessments with a number of people that were doing the same thing, that thought that they were eating healthy, they were eating in an imbalanced way. It just goes back to the imbalance. You know, they weren't eating in a way to stabilize blood sugar. There's a way to eat specifically that stabilizes blood sugar. And when you're vegan, it's very difficult because you're eating a lot. You're eating primarily carbohydrates and some fats, but you're not getting enough protein and you're not eating the protein and the carbohydrates and the fats in a balanced way at most meals. So, and then you could be, not everybody's doing this, that's vegan or vegetarian, but they could be eating more processed foods. And so then that also contributes to what we're talking about here. So, so I've seen that a lot.
What about therapeutic diets, such as the carnivore, ketogenic?
Generally speaking, you can get away with eating in a certain restrictive way for a little while before it starts to have negative effects, right? Meaning like if you were eating more like say you're doing intermittent fasting, that's a great example. It can actually be beneficial for a period of time, but at a certain point, it will stop being as beneficial and start doing the opposite then. And I've seen that happen as well, where people are doing intermittent fasting to lose weight, and they did lose, but they were doing it for beyond, a year and a half even, and they were starting to suffer, like their thyroid and adrenal started to suffer, where their metabolism lowered, their energy level lowered as a result of that. They had more muscle waste that was starting to happen as a result of that. They were acting in a way of like they were prematurely being aged. And so, and again, it just has to do with being out of balance for a prolonged period of time. You can be out of balance for a period of time, but not a prolonged period of time without suffering. And I can speak to that even personally because I used to compete. I used to be a competitor in bodybuilding, and you have to do extreme dieting when you're doing that. And the longer you do that, the more you suffer. You cannot stay in that imbalance a prolonged period of time without paying a price.
The paradigm here is bringing systems back into balance and letting the system heal itself.
Let's just use an example too of like the carnivore diet. You could, people could lose weight with a carnivore diet too. You could sometimes lower insulin, but you're not getting the fiber that you need. You're not getting the fiber that you need. So your colon will suffer. Your digestive system will become dysbiotic because fiber is what's needed to feed your good bacteria. So you will develop some gut dysbiosis, and then that has a negative impact on your whole system. You see what I'm saying? So you'll be able to do it for a period of time, but then you're eventually going to have to shift.
So you could do it for therapeutic reasons, because I've heard about people, their gut just cannot take roughage, so they have to do carnivore.
That could be because their gut is dysbiotic to begin with and an inflamed gut microbiome to begin with. So they could have already had gut dysbiosis, and then they chose to go that route. instead of dealing with the gut dysbiosis. But the gut dysbiosis has to be dealt with. You know what I mean? Because it's not even just about, being able to eat certain things. It's also about how does that affect their immune system? How does that affect their endocrine system? One thing that we know is that a common denominator in autoimmune disease is a dysbiotic gut. And if you have a dysbiotic gut, you have a leaky gut. So if you're going to heal your gut, you have to balance it. It's the microbiome in there. There's the germ theory versus terrain theory. There's validity in both, but the terrain theory has not been as emphasized. I mean, it's starting to get more emphasis now, but the terrain theory is huge in regards to you've got to create a healthy environment if you're going to have healthy bacteria, right? Like same thing we're talking about with the biogeometry. If you're going to have healthy individuals and balanced individuals in an environment, you've got to deal with the environment too, right? You've got to deal with terrain as well that they're living in. And so this also applies, want to be healthy, you've got to have a healthy terrain internally. I will say too, like, going back to this whole balance aspect, having research, nutrition, and when you understand real nutrition and you understand the power in certain herbs and the power in certain vitamins and the power in certain foods, you have such a profound respect for nature. I respect nature so much in terms of what it can do and what's possible. And most people have no idea about the power of nature because they haven't experienced it in that way. So when I take patients through a treatment, a protocol treatment, like I'm working with them for 6 months to a year, we call it corrective care. So we're doing corrective care for 6 months to a year. They get to experience the power of nature, and it will shift their awareness forever if they really get it. You know what I mean? Because it isn't about taking a multivitamin. Most people don't experience anything with that other than, oh, I have a little bit more energy, or it's more psychological, if anything, to them, that they feel like, oh, I have insurance. If I'm not eating the best way, I have some insurance over here that I'm getting the nutrients I need. That's not true, number one. And they don't have any kind of healing experience with that because most of those are not made from real food anyway. They're manufactured in a lab from toxic byproducts. There's that. But in no way is it being used therapeutically. It's not just about these consuming things. It's understand how to consume them in a way to support you. If you go to my Instagram, you'll see on there it has medicine woman under awareness expansion because, yeah, like when you understand how powerful natural medicine is, it can be life changing. There's so much that we could share. We can save more for another time, but I want to leave people with the things that you're experiencing and what you're going through is not random, right? It is to shape you. It is to guide you. It is for you to have the experiences that you need to evolve. And what is your perception around that? Start asking questions. Why is this happening? What is this trying to teach me? What is this trying to show me? Right. And maybe next time I'll share a story around that. When I realized, oh, wow, I didn't listen to the guidance. And now this whole thing was created for me to experience to understand the importance of the message. Right. So I'll share that maybe next time. And yeah, yes, I would love to hear any comments that people have, like sharing their own experience with even just some of the concepts that we've talked about here.
Yeah.
Right. And definitely like check in with Naomi about maybe doing a reading with her. Because again, some of what you could be experiencing, you can see in your natal blueprint.
We all read different versions of the natal blueprint, right? Caroline, you're an astrologer. I happen to look at the body graph. The same information comes through in so many different ways.
I think it's just to be on the journey of knowing thyself, right? And you have help with that. You have internal help, you have external resources that you can tap into, and, support, right? Mental and emotional support is really valuable, I feel like, in this day and age. And also just can help you like with a better and deeper level of understanding. I feel like we can have greater compassion for ourselves and for humanity. And that's what I was trying to convey with the processional cycle, is like everything that we are seeing with like a focus on the materialism, more of a patriarchal dominant society. We're not as spiritually advanced as we were at one time in history. We've advanced more technologically. Like all these things have everything to do with where we're at in the processional cycle. So we were being influenced in a way that we are not necessarily conscious to. And so when you realize that, it really helps you have a lot of compassion for ourselves. And the good news is now we're in this new cycle and we're moving out of that. So that's also really exciting. Because like what we had built, as amazing as it has been and incredible to experience, it's not balanced, and it's not in balance with nature and creation and the earth. And so it's just not sustainable. And so it's going to change. It's changing. It needs to change for us to bring in that balance, which will support us in such a better way, mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, greater balance.
Where can everyone find you?
So I have an Instagram, awareness expansion Instagram. Um, I don't have the awareness expansion website just yet built. That's in process. I do have another functional medicine site, nativesunnutrition.com, and the sun is SUN, native sun. And isn't that funny? Sun is in that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. If you're interested, send an email to info@awarenessexpansion.org, because the Awareness Expansion is a nonprofit. If you're interested in becoming part of the community and what we're building, because basically what we're building is a new sacred site. That's how I would look at it. It's a new sacred site we're building like we did, back during the golden age. And it is a new sacred site. And if you want to in any way, shape, or form be part of that, you can just send an email and I can add you to our Telegram community.
Well, thank you so much for having this conversation today. There will be plenty more, and everyone can look forward to that.
Yeah, yes. I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Naomi.
Take care, everyone.